My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 29 years old, and for a long time, I genuinely believed my breakup was the most uneventful ending a relationship could have. No screaming, no cheating reveal, no dramatic ultimatums or block numbers. Just two adults sitting across from each other, acknowledging that whatever had once worked between us no longer did. We'd been together for 2 years, long enough to matter, not long enough to feel irreversible. Different life goals growing in opposite directions, the usual explanation people give when there's no obvious villain. We hugged, wished each other well, and walked away. At least that's what I thought we did. For about a month afterward, my life returned to its normal rhythm. Work during the day, gym in the evenings, quiet dinners at home. I didn't stalk his social media. I didn't replay conversations in my head. I genuinely felt fine. Relieved, even. It felt like the clean ending people always talk about, but rarely get. Then the first text arrived. Hey stranger, miss you. Thinking about us today. That Thai place we loved is closing. Sad, right? It seemed harmless enough. Nostalgic but not aggressive. I told myself responding politely was the adult thing to do. Hey, hope you're doing well. I think it's best we don't stay in touch for now. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was an invitation. The messages kept coming. Not every hour at first, just often enough to stay present. Inside jokes, old memories, random observations meant to remind me we had once been close. When I stopped replying, the calls started. Morning calls I didn't answer. Voicemails in the afternoon. Late-night missed calls with messages like, I just wanted to hear your voice. I ignored them all. That was apparently a mistake. I work as an accountant. Quiet office glass walls, low voices, professionalism drilled into everyone from day one. Personal drama doesn't belong there, which is why my coworker's confused expression should have warned me something was wrong. There's a guy downstairs asking for you, she said. He says he's your boyfriend. Ex-boyfriend, I corrected automatically, already standing up. I found him in the lobby, calm, composed, dressed like he was attending a business meeting. Smiling like nothing was wrong. What are you doing here? I asked, keeping my voice low. I was nearby, he said casually. Thought we could grab lunch and talk. I'm working. We're not together anymore. You can't come here. That's when the tears started. Not quiet ones. Full breakdown. Loud enough that my manager glanced over from the hallway. I walked away heart pounding, pretending this wasn't happening. Surely he'd be embarrassed enough not to repeat it. 2 days later, he was back. Same lobby, same posture, same insistence that he just needed to talk. This time I didn't even go downstairs. Security told him I wasn't available. After that, he started waiting outside my building, just sitting in his car, watching. And that was when the feeling in my chest changed from discomfort to fear. I wish I could say there was a single moment where everything clicked, where I suddenly understood that what was happening to me had crossed a line. But the truth is, it crept in slowly, disguising itself as persistence, as heartbreak, as someone who just couldn't let go. Every time my instincts whispered that something was wrong, another voice answered back, quieter but crueler, telling me I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic, that this was just an awkward breakup playing out longer than it should. After he started sitting outside my office building, I changed my routine without even thinking about it. I left work later, waited until the lobby emptied, scanned the street before stepping outside. Sometimes his car wasn't there, and I'd feel foolish for the tension coiled in my shoulders. Other times it was parked across the street, engine off, windows dark. He didn't wave, didn't approach. He just watched the entrance like he was waiting for something to happen. A friend noticed before I said anything. We were grabbing coffee after work when he glanced out the window and stiffened. Natalie, he said carefully, isn't that your ex's car? I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. Yeah, I said too quickly. He's just around. That's not around, he replied. That's sitting and waiting. I laughed it off because that was easier than admitting the truth. Because admitting the truth meant admitting I was scared. The next escalation came when I stopped seeing his car outside the building. For 2 days, nothing. No texts, no calls, no familiar silhouette across the street. I allowed myself to believe it was over, that he'd finally gotten the message. On the third evening, as I walked toward my car in the parking garage, I heard my name. He was standing right beside my driver's door. Not in his car this time. Too close. Close enough that I froze before I could stop myself. We need to talk, he said. No, I answered, my voice shaking despite my effort. We don't. You need to stop this. You can't just throw away 2 years, he insisted, stepping closer. I'm not asking for much, just a chance. We broke up months ago, I said. This is getting weird. I love you, he said like it was a revelation. He had never said that once while we were together, not when it mattered, not when I waited for it. Hearing it now felt wrong in a way I couldn't fully explain. I'm asking you nicely, I said, backing away. Stop texting me. Stop calling me. And stop showing up where I am. He grabbed my arm. Not hard, not violently, but deliberately. Please, he said, just give me another chance. I yanked my arm free, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Don't touch me. I mean it. Leave me alone. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, replaying the moment over and over in my head. The way his fingers closed around my wrist. The look in his eyes when I pulled away like I'd betrayed him by refusing to be pulled back in. That night I called the police non-emergency line. I told myself it was just to ask questions, just to understand my options. I explained everything. The constant messages, the workplace visits, the waiting outside my building, the parking garage confrontation where he'd grabbed me after I told him to stop. You can file a report, the officer said calmly. Document all contact. If it continues, you can pursue a restraining order. I filed the report the next day. Screenshots, call logs, dates, times, statements from coworkers who'd seen him in the lobby. It felt surreal, laying out my life like evidence in a case file, but it also felt grounding. Real. Someone was finally taking me seriously. When I showed everything to my cousin, who's a lawyer, she didn't hesitate. File for the restraining order, she said. Repeated workplace harassment after being told to stop. Physical contact. You've got a solid case. Filling out the paperwork was terrifying and empowering at the same time. Terrifying because it meant admitting how bad things had gotten. Empowering because it meant I was done asking politely. The temporary restraining order was approved pending a hearing. And that was when I learned something I hadn't expected at all. He wasn't alone. While he'd been blowing up my phone and sitting outside my office, he'd been posting photos online with someone new. A woman. Smiling selfies, location tags, captions about fresh starts and healing. He had a girlfriend. I gave the address to the sheriff's office. I didn't know it yet, but serving that order at her place was about to blow his entire story apart. I didn't feel victorious when I handed over the address. If anything, I felt hollow, tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones after weeks of vigilance, after constantly checking mirrors and entrances and unread notifications. Part of me hoped the deputies wouldn't find him there, that the whole thing would remain quiet and procedural, something that happened on paper and nowhere else. That wasn't how it went. A few days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I stepped into an empty conference room to answer it, already bracing myself. We successfully served the restraining order, the deputy said. Relief washed through me so fast I had to sit down. Thank you. There's something else you should know, he added, his tone shifting slightly. When we served him, he was at the residence with his girlfriend. I closed my eyes. She seemed surprised, he continued. She asked us if you were the one harassing him. Of course she did. We explained that no, you'd filed police reports about unwanted contact and workplace harassment. She asked to read the order herself. Things got heated after that. I pictured it clearly, even though I hadn't been there. Him scrambling for explanations. Her standing there with a legal document in her hands, realizing the story she'd been told didn't match the reality in black and white ink. He told her you were the problem, the deputy said, that you couldn't move on. And now she knows that wasn't true, I replied quietly. There was a pause. Yes, ma'am, I believe she does. That night, my phone was silent for the first time in months. The quiet didn't last. The next morning, my ex's sister called me. I answered and immediately started recording the call, my cousin's advice echoing in my head. What the hell did you do? She demanded. I filed a restraining order against your brother for harassing me. He wasn't harassing you, he just wanted closure. He showed up at my workplace multiple times after I told him not to. He sent hundreds of messages. He grabbed me in a parking garage. You destroyed his relationship, she snapped. His girlfriend dumped him because of you. Because of me, I said evenly. I didn't say a word to her. The police served a court order at her house. He lied to her about who the stalker was. She scoffed. He was protecting himself from you. The mental gymnastics were almost impressive. I told her there was a police report, witness statements, screenshots, and a judge-approved order. She called me heartless and hung up. Minutes later, the text started. Friends of his people I barely knew accusing me of being vindictive, cruel, obsessed. Not one of them asked why a judge would grant a restraining order without evidence. I blocked them all. Then came the email from HR. An anonymous complaint claiming I was harassing a man abusing my position, creating a hostile work environment. I stared at the screen numb. This wasn't just emotional anymore. This was an attempt to damage my livelihood. I walked into the HR meeting with a folder so thick it barely closed. Police report, restraining order, screenshots, case numbers. My supervisor's expression changed as he flipped through the pages. So he said slowly, "You're the victim here." "Yes," I answered. "That's why there's a court order." The complaint was closed as unfounded. I was told to call security immediately if my ex appeared again. Meanwhile, his ex-girlfriend, now ex-girlfriend, posted something vague online about lies and learning who someone really is. Then her profile went private. That should have been the end. Instead, I received a letter from a lawyer threatening to sue me for defamation. I called my cousin. She read it once and laughed. "This is intimidation," she said. "Truth is an absolute defense. You have documentation and a court order." She responded on my behalf. Calm, surgical, final. We never heard from that lawyer again. But my ex still wasn't finished. I thought the legal response would scare him into stopping. I really did. A restraining order. A lawyer's letter shut down in one clean paragraph. His girlfriend gone on paper. It looked like every lever of consequence had been pulled. But desperation doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care about paper or warnings or judges. It only cares about access. When he lost the ability to reach me directly, he started leaving pieces of himself behind instead. The first delivery was flowers. No card, just my name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. The building concierge called me. "Someone left these for you," she said carefully. I didn't touch them. Took photos. Documented the time. Then asked her to throw them away. 2 days later, there was a framed photo of us leaning against my apartment door. A picture from early in our relationship when everything still felt uncomplicated. Beneath it, folded neatly, was his old key. The one I'd already replaced the locks for. "I sent everything to my cousin." "Violation," she said. "Keep documenting." The building manager called next. "Your ex keeps trying to get inside," he told me. "Says he left something in your apartment." "There's a restraining order," I replied. "If he comes back, call the police." He came back. This time the police were called. Before I even knew he was there, he left before they arrived, but the report was filed. Another timestamp. Another violation. When direct contact failed and presence failed, he tried people. A mutual friend knocked on my door one evening, looking uncomfortable before I'd even opened it fully. "She wants to apologize," he said. "Just face to face. She says if you hear her out, she'll leave you alone." "There's a restraining order," I replied. "She's not allowed to contact me. That includes sending people." "I know, but she's really struggling. She lost her girlfriend over this. She just wants closure." "She can get closure in court," I said. "She harassed me for months, lied about me, tried to get me fired, and threatened me legally. I'm done." He left without arguing, guilt written all over his face. I wondered if he'd realized too late that he'd been manipulated into violating a court order. Court day arrived faster than I expected. I showed up with my cousin and 2 folders of evidence. My ex arrived with his lawyer, his sister, and his mother. His mother glared at me like I'd personally ruined her life. His sister wore a small, confident smile like this was all going according to plan. It wasn't. My cousin laid out the timeline calmly. The messages, the workplace appearances, the surveillance, the physical contact, the violations after the temporary order was issued. His lawyer tried the emotional angle. He was just heartbroken. He wanted to reconcile. He didn't understand the boundaries. The judge looked unimpressed. "He was told repeatedly to stop," she said. He continued. "He showed up at her workplace. He made physical contact. That is harassment." But he was emotional. "Emotions do not excuse harassment," the judge interrupted. "Does your client dispute any of these incidents?" The lawyer turned to my ex. He whispered something urgently. "No, Your Honor," my ex said finally. "But the context, the judge replied, is that you were told to stop and you didn't." The gavel came down. Permanent restraining order. 1 year. No contact. No third parties. No workplace or residence. Any violation would result in arrest. His mother stood up furious. "This is ridiculous!" The bailiff moved, and she sat down just as quickly. As we left the courtroom, I heard him crying behind me. His sister whispered to him, shooting me a look full of venom. I didn't look back. Stop. Part 5. The quiet that finally stuck. I sat in my car for a long time after leaving the courthouse, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing like I'd just finished running. Relief came first, heavy and dizzying, followed by exhaustion so deep it felt emotional instead of physical. For months, my life had been defined by vigilance, where I parked, how I left work, who I answered, what I documented. And now, with a single ruling, that weight had shifted off my shoulders. My phone buzzed. A text from a friend. "You need to see this." Attached was a screenshot of a public post from his former girlfriend. No names, no specifics, just a blunt message that cut straight through every lie he'd been telling. A PSA. If someone tells you their ex is crazy and won't leave them alone, maybe ask why there's a restraining order filed against them. Trust your gut. I didn't. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't angry. That made it devastating. Within days, people in their circle started connecting dots. Quiet conversations, side messages. The version of him that had painted himself as a victim didn't hold up against court records and police involvement. Stories he'd told about his job, his finances, even his past relationships started unraveling. Turns out lying rarely stays contained to one area of life. I didn't engage, didn't comment, didn't watch. I blocked him everywhere, let the order do its job. A few weeks later, I got a message request from his mother. It was an essay, accusations disguised as concern. I was ruining his life. He was a good man who made mistakes. I was cruel for not forgiving him. I should be a woman and show compassion. I took screenshots and sent them to my cousin. "Violation?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "Third-party contact. Save it." I replied once carefully. "This message violates the restraining order. Do not contact me again." Then I blocked her. The final attempt came in the form of a handwritten letter mailed from another town. 6 pages. I didn't read past the first paragraph. I placed it in a plastic sleeve, documented it, and called the police. An officer came to collect it as evidence. I could have pressed charges. I chose not to. Not because he deserved mercy, but because I deserved peace. Months passed. Silence held. I started therapy, joined a recreational sports league, made friends who didn't know him, didn't know the story, didn't see me as a cautionary tale. Eventually, I started dating again. Slowly, carefully. I told my boyfriend the truth early on. He listened, didn't minimize, didn't question why I'd gone to the police. He said, "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." Life became boring again, in the best way. I ran into his sister at a grocery store one afternoon. She saw me and immediately turned down another aisle like I was the one to be afraid of. That felt like closure. The thing that still stays with me is how ordinary it all started. 2 years together, a calm breakup. No warning signs loud enough to hear until it was too late. But the restraining order being served at his girlfriend's home exposed the truth in a way nothing else could have. Lies can survive arguments. They can survive social circles. They can't survive legal documents and 2 deputies at the door. I didn't ruin his life. I protected mine. Sometimes karma doesn't need your help. Sometimes it just needs you to stop engaging and let the truth speak for itself. My name is Rita Shacher, and I was 32 years old when I learned how easily someone you love can decide your life belongs to them. I owned my 4-bedroom house outright, a fact that still didn't feel real even after 3 years. I bought it with no inheritance, no financial help, and no safety net beyond my own discipline and exhaustion. For 10 years, I worked as a software engineer, living like a broke college student, long after I could technically afford more, because every spare dollar went toward freedom. That house wasn't just a building to me. It was proof. Proof that I could build something alone, protect myself, and never owe my stability to anyone else's goodwill. Every wall, every floorboard, every quiet night was earned. George Simmons. My boyfriend of nearly 3 years moved in 8 months earlier. We had discussed it carefully, or at least I thought we had. He made about $42,000 a year as a dental hygienist, and I made significantly more. We agreed early on that he wouldn't pay rent. Instead, he covered groceries and some utilities, while I handled the property taxes, insurance, and everything else. It felt fair, balanced adult. We were engaged after all. Wedding planned for the spring. Save the dates mailed. Venue deposit paid. His suit picked. My dress hanging in the closet, wrapped in plastic like a promise, waiting patiently for its moment. For a long time, things felt good, comfortable, predictable in the way healthy relationships are supposed to be. Then, 3 weeks before everything fell apart, George started acting differently. He took phone calls in the garage, lowered his voice when I walked into a room, ended conversations abruptly, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. When I asked, he brushed it off with a playful tone, telling me he was planning a surprise and that I should stop trying to ruin it by guessing. I assumed it was something harmless, maybe a birthday trip or a small party. I didn't push. Trust makes you generous with silence. Looking back, that silence cost me clarity. The day everything changed was a Tuesday. Ordinary in every way until it wasn't. I came home around 6 in the evening, tired already mentally planning dinner and a quiet night. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a U-Haul truck parked along the curb. It struck me as odd, but I dismissed it. People move all the time. I had no reason to believe that truck had anything to do with me. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. My living room was full of people I had never seen before. An older couple sat on my couch like they belonged there. A man in his early 20s lounged in my recliner, scrolling on his phone. 2 teenage girls stood near my fireplace, taking selfies, laughing as if they were on vacation. Boxes lined the walls. Furniture had been shifted. A decorative sign hung over my mantel, crooked and loud, reading "Family is everything." Before I could speak, George rushed out of the kitchen, beaming like a child who couldn't wait to show off a secret. "Surprise," he said brightly. "I wanted everything set up before you got home, but you're early." I stood there, keys still in my hand, staring at the evidence that my life had been rearranged without my permission, my consent, or my knowledge. And in that moment, before anyone explained anything, before I spoke a single word, something inside me went very still. Because deep down I already knew. I remember blinking a few times, not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because my brain was trying to catch up to the reality in front of me. The house smelled different, like unfamiliar perfume and cardboard and someone else's cooking. Sounds filled the space too. Voices, laughter. The scrape of furniture legs against hardwood I had carefully maintained for years. This was my home, yet suddenly it felt like I'd walked into someone else's life mid-scene. "What is this?" I finally asked, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. George's smile didn't falter. "They're my family. My mom, my dad, my brother, and my sisters. They're moving in." Moving in. The words landed with weight, each syllable heavy and deliberate, as if he'd practiced saying them until they sounded reasonable. I looked around again, slower this time. The older woman on my couch, his mother apparently, was already standing, arms open, eyes glossy with gratitude. His father loomed just behind her, broad-shouldered, assessing me like a problem to be managed. The young man in my recliner glanced up briefly, bored, then went back to his phone. The twin girls angled their cameras again, documenting everything. "We're so grateful," his mother said, stepping toward me. "George told us you'd be happy to have us here." I took a step back before she could touch me. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the room. "Moving in," I repeated, keeping my gaze on George. "You moved 5 people into my house without asking me." His smile flickered just for a second. "I wanted it to be a surprise. They lost their rental, the landlord sold the building. They had nowhere to go, and we have all this space. I knew you'd say yes." "You knew I'd say yes," I echoed, my voice flat. "Yes," he said, quickly nodding, as if that settled it. "We're getting married. It's our home. What's yours is ours." That was the moment something shifted. Not exploded, not cracked, shifted. A quiet, unmistakable realignment of how I saw him. "We're not married," I said. "And this house is in my name. You know that." His father stepped forward, then inserting himself into the space between us. He was tall, solid, the kind of man who relied on physical presence to carry authority. "Now hold on," he said. "We're family. Family helps family. We just need a place to land for a bit. A few months. Maybe a year. A year. 5 additional people indefinitely in the home I'd worked 10 years to own outright." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. George grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" "I'm calling the police," I said simply. His mother gasped. One of the girls let out a dramatic, "Oh my God," the phone still pointed at me. His brother finally sat up, interest sparking in his eyes. "You can't do that," George said, panic creeping into his tone. "They're not trespassing. I invited them." "You don't have the authority to do that," I replied. Already dialing. Guests don't arrive with a U-Haul. Guests don't unpack boxes and rearrange furniture. "This is insane," George said, his voice breaking. "I thought you loved me. I thought we were building a life together." "We were," I said quietly, "until you decided to make a massive life decision without even asking me." "That's why I made it a surprise," he snapped. "I knew you'd say no." The line connected. I gave the operator my address and explained that there were unauthorized occupants in my residence who were refusing to leave. As I spoke, the room erupted. His mother started crying loudly. His father began shouting about disrespect and family values. The twins narrated everything into their phones like this was entertainment. When I ended the call, I looked at George and said the words that stopped everything cold. "We're done. The wedding is off." His face drained of color. "You can't be serious." "You moved your entire family into my house behind my back," I said. "That's not love. That's manipulation." 10 minutes later, when the police arrived, the decision was no longer emotional. It was procedural. Ownership confirmed. Authority established. Boundaries enforced. As I sat on the porch listening to chaos inside my house, I realized something with startling clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a test. And he had already decided I was supposed to fail. The police stayed for nearly 2 hours, while George's family packed their things back into the U-Haul. I watched from the porch not out of spite, but because I no longer trusted myself to be inside my own house without something breaking either a piece of furniture or my restraint. His mother cried the entire time, wailing loud enough for the neighbors to hear. His father argued with the officers until his voice went hoarse. His brother paced the driveway muttering about lawyers and injustice. The twins filmed everything, occasionally zooming in on my face like they were waiting for me to react the way villains do in movies. I didn't give them that satisfaction. George hovered near me, alternating between rage and desperation. He kept trying to talk, to explain, to justify what he'd done as compassion instead of control. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to discuss. When the last box was loaded and the truck finally pulled away, one of the officers lingered. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Situations like this escalate fast when people try to handle them emotionally." I thanked him, shut the door, and stood in the silence that followed. The sign that read, "Family is everything," was still hanging over my mantel. I tore it down and dropped it in the trash without ceremony. Then I sat on the floor of my living room and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The betrayal, the shock, the grief, and underneath it all, an unexpected sense of relief. Because if George was willing to do this before we were married, I could only imagine what he would have justified afterward. The quiet didn't last long. My phone started lighting up that night. Calls and texts from numbers I didn't recognize. His parents. His brother. One of the twins even sent me a message calling me a narcissist and a monster. I blocked everyone except George. Not because I wanted to hear from him, but because I needed a line open for logistics. He still had belongings in my house, and I wasn't interested in being accused of stealing. On the second day, he showed up unannounced. I was working from home when he walked straight into my office like nothing had happened, key in hand, entitlement in every step. "We need to talk," he said. "You should have knocked," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "I live here," he said. "You did," I corrected. "You don't anymore." He sat across from my desk like this was a negotiation. "I overreacted," he said. "Moving them in without telling you was wrong. I see that now. But you overreacted too. Calling the police, canceling the wedding. That's extreme." I leaned back in my chair. "You had a U-Haul. You rearranged my furniture. You hung decorations. That wasn't a mistake. That was a plan you knew I wouldn't agree to, so you executed it behind my back." He tried tears next. Apologies, claims of panic, stories about his parents having nowhere to go. "Where are they now?" I asked. "A motel," he admitted. "So they found a solution without my house," I said. "You need to schedule a time to pick up your things. This weekend." He stood up, anger replacing sorrow. "You're heartless. You're selfish. This was the worst mistake of my life." "No," I said calmly. "Assuming my home was yours to give away was." The next morning, his father showed up at my door at 7 a.m., pounding hard enough to shake the frame. I watched him on my doorbell camera for 2 full minutes before opening it. "You embarrassed my family," he barked. "You called the cops on us like criminals." "You were trespassing," I said. "If you come back again, I'll call them again." His face reddened as he leaned closer, trying to intimidate me into compliance. I closed the door, locked it, and filed a report. By the end of the week, I received a formal letter from a lawyer. Demands for money, housing, emotional damages, a request for George to move back in for 30 days. I laughed, then forwarded it to my attorney. What they were calling cruelty was simply me refusing to surrender control of my life. And they hated me for it. The letter from George's lawyer sat on my kitchen counter like a threat dressed up as professionalism. I read it twice slowly, not because I was confused, but because I wanted to be certain I wasn't missing some hidden implication that would suddenly make any of it reasonable. compensation for emotional distress, reimbursement for financial contributions made during the relationship, a reasonable transition period in which George would be allowed to move back into my home for 30 days, payment for a wedding dress he claimed couldn't be returned. The total amount demanded felt arbitrary, inflated, and deeply insulting. I laughed out loud, then called my attorney. He listened patiently as I read the letter to him, occasionally making a sound somewhere between amusement and disbelief. When I finished, he said, "This is nonsense. He was never on the deed, never on a lease, and this state doesn't recognize common law marriage. Shared expenses aren't loans unless there's documentation. And as for moving back in, absolutely not." Hearing it laid out so clearly was grounding. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't heartless. I was legally and morally within my rights, and George's sudden interest in law had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with leverage. My attorney drafted a response declining every demand and warning that continued harassment would result in a countersuit for legal fees. The letter went out the same afternoon. For a few days, things were quiet. Then the calls started again. This time from unknown numbers. I stopped answering. The messages shifted tones, swinging between guilt and fury, grief and accusation. George's mother left a voicemail telling me I'd destroyed their family. His brother texted that I should watch my back. I saved everything and forwarded it to my lawyer, who advised me to document and disengage. About a week later, I got a call from a local news station. The reporter introduced herself politely and asked if I'd be willing to comment on a story about a woman who had called the police on her fiancé's homeless family and thrown them out onto the street. Apparently, someone had pitched it as a viral human interest piece. Woman helps family. Cold, successful homeowner refuses compassion. Police drama ensues. I told her I'd be happy to talk. I explained exactly what had happened, that I came home to 5 strangers in my house, that there had been no discussion, no consent, that George had explicitly admitted he did it as a surprise because he knew I'd say no if he asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He said that she asked. Those were his exact words, I replied. The story never aired. Instead, one of the twins posted footage from my doorbell camera of her father confronting me early that morning. The comments were not kind to him. Watching a grown man attempt to intimidate a woman on her own property while demanding she fix a situation she didn't create turned out to be less sympathetic than they'd hoped. By then, George had agreed to pick up his belongings. I packed everything carefully labeled each box and stacked them neatly in the garage. I sent him one final message with a deadline and made it clear I wouldn't negotiate beyond that. Saturday arrived with gray skies and a sense of finality I hadn't expected to feel so sharply. He showed up with his brother and his father. I had a friend inside the house with me, and I'd already notified the local precinct. I wasn't interested in being caught off guard again. George barely looked at me as they loaded the truck, making loud, pointed comments about wasted years and heartless people. I didn't respond. I simply watched my life shed itself of someone who had never truly respected it. When they were almost done, George came to the door. "I want the engagement ring back," he said. I told him the law was clear. The ring was conditional. There would be no marriage. His anger flared, then collapsed into something quieter as he walked away. And as the truck disappeared down the street, I realized the story they'd been trying to tell about me had fallen apart. All that was left was the truth. When the truck disappeared at the end of the street, the silence that followed felt different from the one after the police left. That earlier quiet had been raw, vibrating with shock and disbelief. This one was heavier, steadier, like the kind of stillness that settles in after a storm has already done its damage. I closed the garage door, locked it, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the sound of my own breathing inside a house that finally felt like mine again. The legal situation unraveled faster than I expected. After my attorney responded to George's lawyer, there was one final attempt to reframe the narrative. Another letter arrived, this one claiming George had tenant rights and that I had illegally evicted him. My lawyer's reply was concise and devastating. George had never paid rent, was never on a lease, and had no tenancy agreement of any kind. Even if he had been considered a tenant, secretly moving 5 additional occupants into the property would have constituted grounds for immediate eviction. The letter ended with a warning continue, and we would pursue legal fees for harassment. After that, there was silence. No more calls from lawyers. No more threats disguised as legal language. Just quiet. About a week later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned that George and his family were now squeezed into his brother's one-bedroom apartment after the motel became too expensive. His parents were looking for a place of their own, but between the housing market and his father's credit history, progress was slow. George himself had gone from living in a four-bedroom house to sleeping on a pull-out couch sharing space with his teenage sisters. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that, but I didn't feel guilty either. Consequences don't require cruelty to exist. They simply arrive when choices collide with reality. I sold the engagement ring a few days later. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because it represented a future that was never real. I got $3,200 for it, used part of the money to upgrade my home security system, and set the rest aside for a trip I'd been postponing for years. Something quiet. Somewhere far enough away that no one knew my name or my story. The wedding deposits were a mixed loss. Most vendors were understanding, one wasn't. I lost the venue deposit entirely. George's family was supposed to cover half of it, but they never had. I accepted that I'd never see that money again and moved on. Compared to what I could have lost if I'd ignored my instincts, it was a small price. I've heard that George tells people I abandoned him over a misunderstanding, that I was looking for an excuse to leave, that I never really loved him. If that version of events helps him sleep at night, he's welcome to it. I know what happened. The police know what happened. His own lawyer eventually understood what happened, which is probably why everything went so quiet so suddenly. What I learned from all of this is simple, even if living, it was anything but. When someone makes a massive decision about your life without your consent because they know you would disagree, that isn't love. That isn't partnership. That is control disguised as good intentions. George didn't surprise me with a party or a trip. He surprised me with a fundamental violation of trust, then expected gratitude for it. Some people think I went too far, that I should have talked it out, that calling the police on family was extreme, but the relationship ended long before the officers arrived. It ended the moment George decided my home wasn't mine anymore, the moment he planned and executed a scheme specifically because he knew I would refuse if asked. Everything after that was just paperwork. People ask if I miss him. I miss the person I thought he was, the man I believed I was going to marry, but that person wouldn't have done what he did. So what I'm really mourning is an idea, not a reality. And that's a strange kind of grief, but it's one I can live with. My house is quiet now. Just me, the space I earned, and the life I protected. I spent 10 years building this foundation. I'm not about to let anyone take it from me without my explicit, enthusiastic, informed consent. I made my choice. And if I had to do it again, I would make the same one every single time. My name is Patricia Clements, and I'm 31 years old. For 4 years, I believed I was building a solid, adult kind of love, the quiet kind, that doesn't need grand gestures to feel real. 6 months ago, I said yes when my fiancé proposed, convinced that the life we were planning together was rooted in mutual respect, shared effort, and loyalty. I was wrong about one of those things, and I didn't realize which one until the night everyone laughed. He was a dental hygienist, polished, articulate, effortlessly comfortable in social spaces. I ran my own small electrical contracting business. Nothing glamorous, but stable, honest work. I'd worked for every inch of it. We didn't live together yet. We were saving that step for after the wedding. It felt symbolic, like doing things the right way. At least the way I'd been taught to value commitment. The engagement party was his idea, organized by his friends at an upscale wine bar downtown. The kind of place where the lighting is dim on purpose and every drink costs as much as an hour of my labor. I wasn't thrilled. The venue felt pretentious, and his friends had never exactly hidden their judgment of me. They worked in marketing consulting titles that sounded important but vague enough to feel like a private club I hadn't been invited into. Still, I loved him, not them, and I told myself that was enough. About 30 people showed up that night. My friends clustered in one corner, talking sports and work, comfortable and unpolished. His friends floated around the bar, ordering rosé flights and posing for selfies. Two worlds sharing a room without really touching. It was awkward, but manageable, until the toasts. Around 9 o'clock, his best friend, the unofficial ringleader, grabbed the microphone. She'd already had several glasses of wine and wore the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in a public space. She smiled wide and said, "Okay, before our boy here gets locked down forever." She paused, waiting for the attention. "This is your last chance to escape. Marriage is basically prison with shared finances. The room exploded with laughter. Some of my friends chuckled out of discomfort. His friends howled. I turned to look at him, expecting at least a glance, a signal, some quiet acknowledgement that this wasn't okay. Instead, he was laughing, head thrown back, eyes shining, genuinely entertained. Something tightened in my chest. The ringleader wasn't finished. Seriously, though, are you sure you could be back on dating apps by Monday? Freedom is just one bad decision away. More laughter. He raised his glass. Don't tempt me. The sound in the room grew louder, but inside me something went quiet. Another friend chimed in, reminding him of some pact about never settling down before 35. He shrugged dramatically and joked about breaking the rules. Someone else laughed and said maybe he was just settling. He didn't correct them, didn't defend me, didn't say my name. I sat there watching 4 years of small dismissals line up perfectly in my memory. The jokes about my job, the subtle comments about me, punching above my weight, the way he never quite pushed back when they crossed a line. I told myself it was harmless, that love happened in private, not in rooms like this. But watching him laugh at the idea of escaping me in front of everyone we knew, I finally understood what that silence had cost me. I stood up. The room fell still. You know what I said, calmly surprised by how steady my voice sounded? You're right. Marriage shouldn't feel like a prison. So let's cancel it. His smile froze. Patricia, come on, we're just joking. I'm not. I slipped off my watch, the one he'd given me for our 3-year anniversary, and placed it gently on the table. I told them I was done being the punchline to jokes I was never in, done watching my partner stay silent while others disrespected me. I picked up my jacket and said, "Consider this your escape." Then I walked out. Behind me, someone called my name. I didn't turn around. For the first time in years, I felt light. I didn't answer a single call that night. By the time I got home, my phone was vibrating nonstop on the kitchen counter, lighting up the dark apartment with his name over and over again. I watched it for a moment, not with anger, but with something closer to exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones after years of explaining yourself, softening your reactions, convincing yourself that love means endurance. I muted the phone, took off my shoes, and sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, staring at the wall until the silence felt real. By midnight, there were more than 20 missed calls, voicemails too. I didn't listen. I already knew the rhythm of his apologies, confused first, then defensive, then wounded. He would say he hadn't meant it like that it was just his friends being dramatic, that I was taking things too personally. I'd heard all of it before, just never all at once. The next morning there was knocking. Not gentle knocking, the kind that assumes you owe someone access simply because they want it. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there in yesterday's clothes, eyes red, jaw tight. He knocked again. "Patricia, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk like adults." I didn't open it. I texted instead. "I am being an adult who doesn't want to talk right now. Please leave." Another knock, louder. His voice rose just enough that I worried the neighbors could hear. I stayed silent until the knocking stopped. Only then did I breathe again. By Monday morning, the phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. His mother. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said sharply. "But you embarrassed my son in front of everyone. You need to apologize and fix this." I stood in my kitchen, coffee going cold in my hands, and finally said the words I'd been holding back for years. Your son laughed at the idea of leaving me at our own engagement party. He didn't defend me once. I don't owe him an apology. There was a scoff on the other end. "You're being oversensitive. Men joke like that. You wouldn't understand because you're a woman." Something hardened in me then. I understand that my partner should have my back in public. He didn't. That's not a joke. That's a character reveal. She went on about how I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me, how I'd never find someone like her son again. I told her I was counting on it and ended the call before my voice could shake. By Tuesday, the story had already been written for me, and I wasn't the author. Screenshots started coming in from mutual friends, posts implying I was emotionally unstable, comments about me being controlling, insecure, intimidated by successful men, apparently calmly standing up saying less than 30 words and walking out had been translated into emotional abuse. It was surreal watching strangers dissect my character like it was a group project. What hurt most wasn't the lies themselves, but how quickly they stuck. People love a simple villain, and I fit neatly into the role once I refused to stay quiet. That night, his father called. His voice was steady, hesitant, in a way that told me this wasn't easy for him. "I'm not calling to yell," he said. "I saw what's being said online. I want to hear your side." So I told him everything. The jokes, the silence, the way his son never once corrected anyone when they diminished me. The engagement party being the moment I finally stopped pretending it didn't hurt. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know about all of that. He told us you snapped out of nowhere." I'm sure he did. For what it's worth, he added, "I understand why you left, and I'm sorry." That call didn't fix anything, but it grounded me. It reminded me that reality still existed outside the noise. Wednesday morning, a new message came in from an unknown number. "We need to clear the air. You completely overreacted and ruined his party. The least you can do is apologize publicly so people stop thinking we did something wrong. This is affecting my reputation too." I read it twice. Then I replied carefully, deliberately. "Your reputation should be affected. You publicly mock someone at their own engagement party and encourage my fiancé to leave me. That's not humor. That's cruelty with an audience." I was blocked immediately. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't about reconciliation anymore. It was about control of the story of perception of who got to define what had happened. And for the first time, I wasn't interested in keeping the peace. I was interested in the truth. By Thursday, the tone shifted. Up until then, the accusations had been vague, heavy on implication, light on detail. But now the posts were sharper, more confident, like a group that had finally agreed on a script and decided to perform it loudly. Screenshots of old messages were circulating, cropped just enough to suggest a pattern: me expressing frustration, me asking for boundaries, me saying I felt disrespected. Context removed, intent rewritten. Suddenly those moments became proof that I had always been controlling, always jealous, always the problem. I recognized the strategy even before it was fully formed. If you repeat something enough times, people stop asking whether it's true. What I hadn't expected was the call from one of my clients. He sounded uncomfortable, like he was stepping into a conversation he hadn't planned to have. "Hey, Patricia," he said. "I just wanted to check in. I saw some things online. I know it's personal, but I wanted to hear it from you." I explained as calmly as I could. Not defensively, just facts. He listened, told me he appreciated my honesty, said it didn't change how he saw my work. After we hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of what almost happened. The fact that my private life had even brushed up against my professional reputation made something in me snap into focus. This wasn't just emotional fallout anymore. This was damage. That afternoon, I made an appointment with an attorney. I brought everything: screenshots, dates, posts, messages. I laid them out across the desk like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense when you stepped back. The lawyer flipped through them, slowly nodding. "They're making claims that are demonstrably false," she said, "and those claims are affecting your business. You have a case." Hearing that didn't make me feel vindicated. It made me feel tired, because winning wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted it to stop. That night, while organizing old files on my phone, I stumbled across something I hadn't thought about in days. Years of text messages between me and my fiancé, late-night conversations after he came home from outings with his friends, vents, and confessions he'd trusted me with. Messages where he complained about their behavior, their comments, their competitiveness. Messages where he'd agreed they were shallow, said he felt drained by them, promised he'd say something next time. Next time never came. I scrolled slowly, my thumb. Heavy. Every excuse I'd made for him lined up neatly in gray bubbles on my screen. I realized then that I wasn't holding secrets, I was holding evidence. The question wasn't whether I could use it. The question was whether I was willing to. By Friday morning, the posts had escalated again. Now there were stories about me being emotionally unsafe, about how my silence was proof of guilt. One caption read, "When someone shows you who they really are, believe them." I laughed out loud at that, not because it was funny, but because the irony was unbearable. I opened a new message and added everyone to it. Him, his closest friends, the ones who'd been loudest online. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. 4 years of restraint pressed against one decision. Then I hit send. "Hi, everyone. Since you've decided to publicly attack my character, I thought you might want to see what your best friend actually thinks of you." I attached the screenshots, dozens of them. Years worth. Him calling the ringleader, exhausting and desperate for attention. Him saying another friend peaked in college and had been unbearable ever since. Him mocking their relationship advice as rich, coming from people who couldn't keep one together. Him agreeing with me that they were superficial, saying he only stayed close out of history, not respect. The chat went quiet for less than a minute. Then it exploded. Messages flooded in faster than I could read them. Accusations, shock, betrayal, screenshots of their own, now turned inward. Within hours, the ringleader had posted publicly calling him two-faced, manipulative fake. Years of friendship unraveled in real time. My phone rang 17 times. I didn't answer. The voicemails shifted from sobbing apologies to screaming rage to legal threats. One message ended with, "You've destroyed my friendships. I hope you're happy." I deleted them all without listening again. For the first time since the party, the narrative wasn't mine to defend. The truth was doing the work on its own. And I knew then that there was no going back. The collapse was fast and messy, the kind of implosion that happens when a structure was never as solid as it pretended to be. By the weekend, the same accounts that had been posting about toxic behavior and emotional safety were suddenly silent or frantically rewriting their own timelines. Comments were being deleted, captions edited, stories disappeared without explanation. It didn't matter. Screenshots live forever, and everyone involved knew it. He tried calling again Sunday morning. I let it ring. When I finally listened to one voicemail, just one, it was different from the others. No anger this time, just panic. "Patricia, please. You didn't have to do this. You know I didn't mean those things. They were just vents. Private. How could you share that?" I sat on my couch phone in my hand and felt something close to grief. Not for the relationship I'd already mourned that, but for the version of him I'd believed in. The one who supposedly valued honesty, who claimed to hate drama, who insisted he was stuck between loyalty and truth. Hearing him frame his own words as betrayal instead of accountability told me everything I needed to know. On Monday, I sent a single formal message. "Please return the engagement ring." The ring had cost me $8 and $200. I'd saved for it slowly, carefully, telling myself it symbolized the future we were building. In our state, it was considered a conditional gift. If the engagement ended, the ring legally went back to the person who bought it. It wasn't emotional. It was procedural. His reply came quickly. "Wow, you want the ring back. After everything you've done to me, consider it compensation for emotional damages." I forwarded the message to my lawyer. She sent a demand letter that afternoon. Clear language. Legal citations. No room for theatrics. The ring was mine if he wasn't marrying me. That was the law. His mother called within an hour. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask how I was. She went straight to shouting about greed, about how I was attacking her son over jewelry, about how I was showing my true mercenary nature. I let her finish. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "your son is refusing to return $8, $200 of my property. That's not mercenary. That's accountability." She accused me of cruelty, of revenge, of trying to ruin his life. I wished her a good day and ended the call. The lawyer told me later that his own attorney had advised him to stop escalating, that sharing true statements wasn't defamation, that refusing to return the ring would cost him more than it was worth. The fight drained out of him, after that, replaced by spite. 3 days later, the ring arrived in the mail, not in a box, in a padded envelope, stuffed with shredded photos of us, vacations, holidays, moments I barely recognize now. There was a note scrawled on a piece of notebook paper. "I hope you choke on it." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat at my kitchen table, emptied the envelope, and stared at the ring until it felt like just metal again. I sold it that week. Got back $5, $100. Not what I paid, but enough. I donated a portion to a local trade school scholarship fund. The rest went toward the security deposit on a new apartment. A clean start felt more valuable than any symbol I'd once believed in. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. He showed up at one of my job sites the following Monday in front of my crew and a client I'd worked with for years. His face was pale eyes wild, like he'd been running on nothing but adrenaline and resentment. "We need to talk," he said loudly. "You've ruined everything. My friends hate me. My parents are disappointed. I have nothing left because of you." I set down my tools slowly. "You ruined everything when you couldn't stand up for me once in 4 years." He started crying real tears this time, said he loved me, said he'd made one mistake. 4 years of mistakes I corrected. The party was just when I stopped ignoring them. My client stepped forward, then voice firm. "You need to leave. This is a work site." He left calling me names I won't repeat, his voice cracking with every word. That was the last time I saw him. After that day at the job site, the noise finally began to fade. Not all at once. It never does. It receded in uneven waves, one loud moment, followed by days of silence, then a stray message or a half-hearted apology, drifting in from the edges of a life I was no longer part of. His friend group had imploded completely by then. The ringleader posted a long, emotional monologue about betrayal and fake friendships, carefully avoiding her own role in what started everything. Two of the others reached out to me privately, admitting they'd gotten swept up in the drama, that things went too far. I thanked them for saying it. I told them I didn't need anything else. They understood. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt watching it all fall apart. There was no rush of victory, no sense of justice served, just a quiet confirmation that chaos doesn't need encouragement when it's built on dishonesty. It collapses on its own. A week later, his father called again. He apologized not just for the party, but for the years he hadn't seen. He said he'd had some hard conversations with his son and realized how often I'd been dismissed, minimized, treated as optional. He told me he was sorry I'd been made to carry that alone. I thanked him. I meant it. I held no anger toward him. Some people truly don't know what's happening until it's too late. The online posts came down gradually. First, the accusations softened, then they vanished entirely. It's hard to maintain a narrative about an abusive ex when your entire friend group has publicly turned on you and everyone knows you were trashing them in private for years. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise ever had. I moved into my new apartment on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was smaller than the place I'd imagined sharing with him, but it was mine. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, placing things where I wanted them without compromise. No one questioning my choices. No one laughing when I asked for respect. That night, I sat on the floor with takeout and realized something else had ended quietly without me noticing the urge to defend myself. I didn't need to explain anymore. The truth was out there, but more importantly, it was settled inside me. There was one final message I hadn't expected. It came from him late at night, sent through an email account I'd forgotten existed. He wrote about regret, about loneliness, about how he'd lost everything. He said he wished he'd defended me, said he'd been afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of losing his friends, afraid of being alone. I read it once, then I archived it. Fear explains behavior. It doesn't excuse it. I didn't reply. Instead, I booked an appointment with a therapist. Not because I felt broken, but because I'd ignored my own discomfort for years, trained myself to accept disrespect in the name of love. I wanted to understand why. I wanted to do better for myself. The first thing she said to me stuck. You didn't leave because of one joke, she said. You left because that joke confirmed something you'd been feeling for a long time. She was right. Some nights I still replay the moment in my head, the laughter, the raised glass, the way he never looked at me. In those moments, doubt tries to creep in. Could I have handled it differently? Should I have talked to him privately? Was there a version of this that didn't end so completely? Then I remember how small I felt sitting at that table, how invisible. And the doubt fades. The quiet that followed wasn't empty, it was deliberate. For the first time in years, my life wasn't punctuated by someone else's moods, someone else's expectations, someone else's need for approval. There were no group chats buzzing with half jokes and passive insults, no mental math before speaking wondering whether I was about to be too sensitive again. Just space and time, and the unfamiliar responsibility of listening to myself. His father reached out one last time about a week later. He didn't ask for anything. He simply told me he hoped I was doing well, that he'd realized how unfairly I'd been treated, and that he was genuinely sorry. I thanked him and meant it. We ended the call on good terms, and that felt like a quiet kind of closure, not dramatic, not loud, but real. Eventually, the online noise disappeared completely. Posts were deleted, accounts went private, people moved on, as they always do when the spectacle ends. It turned out that outrage has a short shelf life when it's built on shaky ground. Once his own words came to light, there was nothing left to sustain the narrative. I didn't feel vindicated, I felt relieved. Therapy became a weekly ritual, not heavy or emotional every time. Sometimes it was just talking through patterns, learning how often I'd overridden my instincts to keep the peace. My therapist said something during our third session that I wrote down as soon as I got home. You trained yourself to accept disrespect because you loved him. Now you need to train yourself to recognize your own worth. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation, and it fit. I started doing small things differently, saying no without explaining, leaving rooms where I felt talked over, choosing rest over obligation. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. My friends noticed. They didn't comment much, just showed up more. Weekly dinners replaced the old routine of watching games in silence. There was more conversation now, more honesty, less hiding behind jokes. It helped more than I expected. I'm not dating yet. I don't feel rushed. 4 years is a long time to invest in someone, and I'm letting myself feel that loss without turning it into urgency. Being alone no longer feels like a failure, it feels like clarity. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that moment at the engagement party, the laughter, the glass raised in mock temptation, the way my future unraveled in a room full of people. In those moments, a quiet voice asks whether I was too harsh, too final. Then I remember how long I stayed silent, how many times I told myself it didn't matter, how often I accepted being diminished so someone else could stay comfortable. And I know I made the right choice. There's no dramatic twist at the end of this story. No villain arrested, no public redemption arc. Just a woman who finally respected herself enough to walk away from a place where she wasn't valued. Sometimes that's enough.